Hello everybody, it's me Julian, and today I'd like to provide you with a simple and accessible introduction to what you might call Slavoj Žižek's philosophical take on death and dying, specifically how he conceptualizes his own death and dying. In fact, in a relatively recent interview, Žižek was asked, "Do you think about your own death? Do you worry about it?" And his answer was that, well, A, there's no point worrying about it, because strictly speaking, when he dies, it's not his problem, it becomes somebody else's problem. But on a bigger philosophical level, he agrees with the formula that life is an illness for which death is the cure. And that's quite a radically pessimistic statement. In fact, it fits in with Žižek's overall argument about life and death. And so what I'd like to do here is provide you with the basic philosophical building blocks so that you can sort of flesh out this argument. So let's go all the way back to Plato, because Plato is perhaps one of the first to articulate this form of pessimism. Plato says that, strictly speaking, philosophy is how you prepare yourself to die. And he means at least two things. One, as human beings, what distinguishes us from the animal realm is that we are aware of our own death. We realize that life is finite. And this is a kind of existential burden for us. We know that we will not live forever. Therefore, the question is, how do we use the time that is given to us? And in a sense, this problem becomes its own solution, right? Because if you know that you are going to die, then this means that by definition, your time is already precious. Your time is already valuable to you. And the secondary level here is a more philosophical one. Plato argues that if we take this idea to its most radical conclusion, then life is not the opposite of death. Life is, in fact, a process of dying already, which is to say, life is a form of imminent negation. Simply to live, to breathe, to eat, to exist is a movement towards death. You are already dying every single day in small increments, piece by piece. In other words, in the movement towards death, you experience life. And here we have something that Freud would later elaborate in his theory of eros and thanatos, in his theory of the death drive. And yet, if Freud's idea of the death drive is about the movement towards death, then the Lacanian radicalization of Freud is to say that it's not about a movement towards death. It's not about how life moved towards death. It's how death is already a movement within life. In fact, this is why Lacan's famous radicalization of the death drive is to say that, strictly speaking, every drive is a death drive. For example, think about a sexual drive. In French, this is quite explicit. When the French refer to an orgasm, they say it is a petit mort, a little death. Therefore, sexual procreation isn't about life, about serving the cause of creating a future generation. Strictly speaking, it's about obliteration. That the sexual drive is the process by which we enjoy our own obliteration, our own nothingness. And this is at least twofold, right? We have the petit mort, the moment in which we become disembodied from ourselves. And then, of course, we have the process of actually having children, which in a sense is how we materially obliterate ourselves. They will take on life and meaning in the world in our stead. In fact, this is how you can conceptualize Lacan's theory of symbolic death. Essentially, it's twofold. On the one hand, we die symbolically when we are forgotten, right? So you die, and then people forget about you, and so you suffer a double death, as it were, a material death and a symbolic death. First you perish, and then people forget you even lived, and so you don't even exist as an idea in people's heads anymore. But Lacan also meant that when we live, we can be dead. Like, you can be a form of the living dead. You can be going through life without actually experiencing any kind of meaning, which is to say that when you work a job that you don't like, you are experiencing a kind of living death. When you're studying for something that you don't believe in, you are living a kind of living death. Here we have a form of symbolic death by which we become radically subject to something so that we disappear. We are here, but also not. In a sense, this is part of Marx's theory of Entfremdung, or alienation. It is a kind of symbolic death by which the worker can only realize the parameters of his life, i.e. have the necessary things to live, if he is willing to sell his own labor time. Now, I want to add one thing here, though. For Lacan, this doesn't have to be bad. It's not a normative argument. For example, to truly live, we have to make ourselves symbolically dead in some way. Like, Think about it. When you're painting, it's not about you. It's about losing yourself in the painting. When you're in a state of flow coding, it's not about you. It's almost as if it's being written through you. When you're experiencing a religious or spiritual epiphany, you have once again that feeling of being symbolically not there, symbolically dead. In fact, here we have again this idea that every drive is a death drive. Let's say that your goal is to climb to the top of a mountain, and it's incredibly hard to do. And at a certain point, when you can barely breathe and see from exhaustion, you suddenly have this epiphany, this feeling like you are more alive than you ever were before. Here we have once again the death drive, not the drive towards death, but how death lies within drive itself. And this is a paradox of sorts that mirrors the Platonic paradox, right? If life is about imminent negation, a movement towards death, then the way in which we feel most alive is precisely when we inhabit this death, when we stage it, when we symbolize it, not as an end of our life, but as a kind of fall into this abyss of pure drive. In fact, runners talk about this, how they experience like a runner's high. Like if they run for long enough, at a certain point, it feels like their body is simply moving without their will being behind it, and how pleasurable this is. And therefore, this experience of life can emerge precisely from this kind of a drive. Think about how pleasurable a routine is, or a habit. In a weird way, when you have a habit or a routine, you don't have to make a choice. It's that the habit is choosing you. It's already preordained. You simply are subject to it. And here, once again, we have this pessimistic paradox, how life is inhabited fully precisely when we lose ourselves, when we stage a symbolic death. Paradoxically, of course, within capitalism, we're told the exact opposite, that we have to always be happy, that we have to buy as many consumer goods as possible, take a lot of leisure time, but also be really productive at work. And yet, in this sense, it's really difficult to be happy. Often we feel most alive precisely when we're flagellating ourselves, like how people feel good when they're at the gym, or how they'll feel really excellent if they're able to write for 5 hours straight on their manuscript, etc. We lose ourselves, we stage a symbolic death, and herein we feel precisely alive. Now, from a psychoanalytic perspective, this is what Lacan characterizes as the symptom. In fact, part of his argument is that everybody has a symptom. It's something that we carry around with us. It's like an itch that we can never fully satisfy. And that rather than trying to overcome this itch, what we have to overcome is the fundamental fantasy that we would be happier without this itch. That once you embrace your symptom, once you embrace your itch, you can live a meaningful, purposeful life. This means that, for example, if your symptom is that each and every day you want to become incrementally better at miniature golf, then this will give you some sense of purpose. If your symptom, like mine, is to philosophize and to try to educate others, then each and every day you'll make a video thinking that you probably weren't able to express what you wanted to, but maybe tomorrow you will do better. And Žižek makes the same argument. Žižek essentially takes the romantic trope that everything that happens in the world happens so that it can be written down in a book. And he says that this is his pathology. He can only enjoy movies. He can only enjoy art. He can only enjoy life if he knows it's going to go into one of his books. That the whole point for Žižek is to philosophize, and that he can only access enjoyment if he knows that it will be turned into an argument or an illustrative example in his book. And he says, this is my pathology. This is my symptom, as it were. This means that for Žižek, death is a non-problem. When you're conceptualizing death, you're thinking about something that will not, in a sense, happen to you, or it will be done to you, but you won't be there when it happens. Instead, the true problem is how we find a life worth living, how we can stage a kind of symbolic death so as to truly access life. I.e., the question isn't how to overcome death, but how to embrace the symptom and thereby to access life. That is the fundamental Žižekian Lacanian lesson. It's not just that life is an illness for which death is the cure. It's that life is an illness for which the death drive is the cure. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that was valuable. You can download all of my live stream lectures on Patreon, as well as my ebooks. So please do consider going to Patreon. See you tomorrow.